But without further ado, the man who needs no introduction, our great Senator, Senator Pat Roberts.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you. Please. Can't get any better than that. I probably ought to just sit down. Well, I certainly appreciate all of the advice, counsel, and comments from my military brethren in other services. I feel compelled to repeat what we believe in the United States Marine Corps, your 9/11 force in readiness, ready to put cold steel on the enemy at any time. There's a bumper sticker I have in my office: to err is human, to forgive is divine. Neither is Marine Corps policy. I guess you have to stop and think about that. At any rate, Semper Fi, gentlemen, Semper Fi. Mike Pompeo, what a great pick, what a great individual. He's been like a skyrocket. The biggest thing he has going for him, other than simply being Mike Pompeo and a straight shooter, and never stopped being first in his class ever since West Point, is he gets along with the president. That's sometimes a tough thing to do, and he does. He just does. And when he was CIA director and doing the briefing in the morning, the presidential daily briefing, the PDFs, Mike would not use charts. I know in talking to Jim Jones, who used to be the National Security Advisor to the previous president, who wanted his presidential briefings on his iPad delivered to his room in the White House at about 9:30 in the morning, as opposed to 7:30 in the morning when they were normally held and the president would be there in person. That just shows you the difference, and I think Mike is able to express himself in ways that the president understands and agrees with, and he's not hesitant to say something a little bit different if he feels it is necessary. When he talked to me about becoming the CIA director, and that was in the wind, and I said, I'd be delighted. He said, what advice do you have for me? And I said, if I don't see you or hear from you in 2 years, you're doing great. But of course, that was not the case with the things that are happening today. Jim, thank you so much. Where'd you go to? Right there. Thank you so much for taking this on. This is one of those years, again, where we're at a crossroads. I think everybody says that. I said that in 2014, for sure. I said probably in 2008. I didn't say that when I was unopposed. I thought, but you never know. Somebody could write somebody in. I think I'm 24-0 with regards to elections, and that means if there was anybody on the ballot, well, anybody sometimes turned into somebody, and that was a pretty tough go. But you can't lose one, and that applies to your own congressman here, who's doing a great job, and my wife and his wife will be here momentarily. They are greeting the honor flight that is coming back to the Eisenhower Airport, and I emphasize Eisenhower Airport, and thank everybody here for doing that. We are on board and on schedule with the Eisenhower Memorial. I've been privileged to be the chairman of that for some years, taking over from Ted Stevens of Alaska. We have the family on board, the federal funding's there. We need $25 million in private funds. We have 23.5. So if I call you, at least take the call. And so we're going to get that done. We're going to have the dedication. We've already had the groundbreaking. And we'll have the dedication in 2020 on the 75th anniversary of D-Day. And so that'll be a historic thing. Not too many World War II veterans are on the honor flights today. These folks are up in their 90s now, all part of the greatest generation. Extremely proud of them. When they get off the plane in Washington, everybody stops and starts clapping. And you can tell from tears in their eyes, they never expected that, but they're in their nation's capital, which I try to emphasize, their World War II memorial, which they gather. Hopefully they get up to see the Iwo Jima Memorial, which I originally thought was the World War II memorial. Bob Dole just worked overtime to get that done. And we owe him a debt of gratitude for so many things, but more especially the World War II memorial belonging to all veterans. We have the Korean memorial there, we have the Vietnam memorial there, but that World War II memorial is just spectacular. And so that's where they gather, and that's where Bob, he hasn't lately, but I'm sure he will in the future, go and sit in a wheelchair that he's there, or a special seat. And word goes around any bus that comes in from any part of the country, and all of a sudden, the word goes around, and you can hear all these veterans that Dole is here. Dole is here. Where's Bob? Where's Bob? Usually, when they get off the bus, they say hi, Pat, and but they say where's Dole? So that's how that works. So we will have finally paid a tribute in a very deserving memorial to Dwight David Eisenhower, Kansas's own, and the man who saved Western democracy when he was the Allied commander in Europe. I hope that Europe still understands that. I think some still do. And then gave us 8 years of peace and prosperity. He's been rated by historians a little bit down in the laundry list. The reason being, I think, is that under Ike, he anticipated when there would be a crisis, and then he took care of it. Many historians, when presidents go through a crisis and then work their way out of it with the help of the American people and the help of the Congress and the help of everybody, they say, well, boy, he did a great job. Well, what better job for Eisenhower to anticipate? Of course, we were at the height of our power then, right after World War II. Went to Korea, stopped the war there. We now have another president that's going to Korea to try to stop the war, or at least the capability that Kim Jong-un has on the north side of the 38th parallel. So, any rate, I want to get back to this crossroads business. There's no room for error. As was pointed out, I think the House right now is a coin toss. I would rather say to you that I'm very confident that we will maintain the majority. I think we will maintain the majority, but it is a coin toss. And you always have the national media to contend with, and they love a fight. They love to make a seat where there might be an opportunity and just score one for the 2nd District in Kansas, and then they nationalize that issue or that race. Money comes flowing in from places you've never heard of, but boy, does it ever come in. So I think the 2nd District probably, Jim, is the one that I'm worried about the most. Kevin will have a tough race simply because Kevin will have a tough race because of where he is. But he does an outstanding job for us. He is a great, great congressman, serves on appropriations, as does Jerry Moran, and so we have two on the appropriations side that really do a lot. Jerry deserves a lot of credit when you see him thank him for the new VA bill, which I think will take care of a lot of problems that our veterans have had. He's done a great job. And then I don't think anybody can take anything for granted. I mean, if you do so at your peril. We're going to be facing a primary with a low turnout. It just will be a low turnout. And I know in 2014, a very low turnout. I think we set a record. And everybody sort of took it for granted. I didn't, but a lot of money came in right at the end in the primary. We were able to survive that and then go on to win with, 102 out of 105 counties and win by about 11%. On the day of that election, the Real Clear average pollsters had me down by .1. The folks that Washington sent me to allegedly be of help to my campaign indicated that they had written a speech that they thought I could give about 11 o'clock. I said, well, number one, I write my own speeches. Number two, why do you wait till 11 o'clock? And they said, well, we think there's a very good possibility that you're going to lose. And I said, I'm not going to lose. I said, I will lead the ticket, and everything will be fine. And just look about 8:15, 8 o'clock, 8:15. That's about when Fox will say, well, Senator Roberts wasn't in the trouble we thought, or that we tried to promote. And, and so what happened was all the media was over with somebody named Norman, who is really a Democrat, but is running as an independent. I understand he's doing it again, for governor. So the media thought that was in a very attractive race. Here is an independent coming into a Kansas race where they don't have a Democrat, even though Claire McCaskill, the senator from Missouri, really promoted Orman, and her husband knows Orman, another hedge fund manager, and told the Democrat candidate on the day that he announced, and his billboards went up, and his signs went up, and the advertising went up, and he went down. He was told he would not get one penny from Washington. The best thing that happened to me on that whole business was a personal friend of mine, Joe Biden. Despite our differences in politics, we got along. And so somebody said, what about that Kansas seat? He says, oh, we're going to take that. He's one of ours. Well, that came out, and we took advantage of that to tell people precisely what was going on. And so at the end of that, why, all of the folks that were over there with Orman, and those balloons were slowly dropping down from the ceiling, and said, has Senator Roberts given his speech yet? And so I told my staff, not the people who are trying to handle me, it's a tough job for my staff to handle me, but that's the way it is, sorry. But at any rate, I said, tell him to come on over, I'll be happy to visit with him. And so they thought I meant that I would delay the speech, so they drove about an hour and 25 minutes to come over from Kansas City, and I had already made my speech and just said, sorry about that. And I said, but, we can go out and do an interview, which, we did for several of them. I'm just pointing out that when I first filed and for the primary, I don't know of anybody that came up to me and said, you're in trouble. I knew that it was going to be a tough race. I knew people were upset. I knew that the kind of candidate that I had normally would not even be considered on a sanity test. But at any rate, national money came in, and about $2.5 million in the last 3 weeks of a primary. I had $900,000, and the chairman of the Republican Senate Committee said, you're not getting a dime, you're going to be fine. That's what you have to put up with sometimes. All of a sudden, things can sneak up on you. I really didn't mean to get into all that. I wanted to suggest something to you. I know that when you're visiting with friends, and I know when you're visiting with Republican friends, many are very, very frustrated. Many don't know that after 20 minutes of listening to the news, you ought to turn it off and maybe read something out of the Wall Street Journal. And I understand that. But despite Chuck Schumer trying to shut everything down, and he has, through the filibuster rule, he can file cloture, that's a fancy name of putting something on a bill and saying, I'm sorry, we're not going to consider it now, we have to debate it for 30 hours. They don't debate it for 30 hours. They may debate it 2 hours each. We're trying to move that to 6 hours so we can get something done. We've wasted 3 months. 3 months are lost to us with regards to what we should be doing for the American people due to Chuck Schumer. My staff says that my allegory doesn't make much sense and you don't understand it, but I'll give it a shot. I said Schumer if we had a jackrabbit that was hopping across the Senate to get across the Senate in a better situation, i.e. a vote, Schumer would probably either shoot the jackrabbit or file cloture on it. It's that bad. And so, now how many understood that? Did everybody understand that? Jackrabbit hopping across, filing cloture, put the jackrabbit away for 30 hours, shoot the jackrabbit, you know. All right, thank you. My staff said that was not an allegory that anybody understood, so sorry I have to explain it. I'm going to rip through this, and then I want to get to questions. And if you're a senator, you just have to sort of put up with this sort of a meandering thing. But like Henry VIII said to one of his wives, I won't keep you long. Somebody understood that better than the jackrabbit. But when you're talking with Republicans, I encourage you to be of good faith. We have done more in this session of Congress with President Trump signing bills, working for bills, despite all of the noise. And I just want to read things to you. The best economy in 18 years. Big news today, the market came up 240 when it lost 250. Worrying about a trade war, and I do worry about a trade war. You can ask me that. But this is the best economy in 18 years. Lower taxes, that's 31 years since we tried to pass a tax bill, and we passed it. And I think it's largely responsible for the improvement in the economy. We did the support for the military. I'm talking about real dollars. We always talked about that, but we always got jammed up because we didn't do an appropriation bill. We did the appropriation bill for the military. We're going to have to do it again. The first obligation that anybody has when they go to Washington is to do what we can to make sure we can guarantee our freedoms and to fund our military to that extent. Now, that can be debatable, but we went through 8 years. The president, first thing he did, the previous president, was go around the world and apologize. I never could figure that out. Well, there were several things I couldn't figure out. But at any rate, let's go to conservative judges, 21 circuit judges, one district judge here from Wichita, another one coming up from up in the Kansas City area, a Supreme Court justice, finally the Alaska Energy Bill, that's taken 38 years, a new National Labor Relations Board that can be of real help. There's an effort to bring about micro units, maybe 50 people who work on a particular part with regards to Boeing or Spirit, and they can now have the ability to become a union if the NLRB rules that way. But we have a person in charge of that board that I hope that he can stop that. We repealed the individual mandate. We have Dodd-Frank light. I wish it could have gone farther with regards to regulatory reform, but certainly of help to our small banking community and small lenders everywhere. Then we have the Veterans Choice Bill. And I think you're familiar with the 40-mile rule, where if a veteran doesn't want to drive 150 miles to come to Wichita VA, the Dole VA, that she can get help at home, or at least where they drive maybe 25, 30 miles other than the VA. The biggest deal is to get the VA to reimburse that small hospital, especially if it is a critical access hospital. And Jerry Moran worked very hard on it. My main concern was to get that Medicare reimbursement up for our small hospitals, because they're really hanging in the wind. And if you use a hospital in a small community, that's pretty tough. Usually they are the highest employment center that you might have. And finally, I would mention Iran, Russia, and North Korea. The president gets blamed or criticized for a lot of things, but and I don't know how the Korean situation is going to work out. I know Mike Pompeo is working overtime on that, and came back to the president and said, well, there's a willingness there. I was in Pyongyang probably 20-some years ago with Ted Stevens. We were trying to arrange for a third-party grain sale. We were there for 2 days, 2 nights. I was never so happy to get out of a place in my life. This is a country where the populace has had freedom taken away from them and probably didn't have it to begin with. They operate as a deity. They are very robotic. They are malnourished still today. Things are a little better. Kim Jong-un is not really a little rocket man. He is a pretty savvy guy. And he has let farmers in North Korea keep part of what they produce. That's historic. He has some kind of a social security program, probably not like ours, but at least he's considering the situation with an awful lot of senior North Koreans. So this man isn't just standing still. I think there will be a summit. I hope this just doesn't explode with Kim Jong-un on the world stage shaking his finger at Trump. Lord knows what will happen to him if he does that. But at any rate, let's hope that this president, willing to do that, it was like Eisenhower who said, I will go to Korea, and did. Obviously, Truman didn't get that done. And Eisenhower said, stop at the 38th parallel to the north, stay there, south, you stay there, stop. South Korea became a regional power, and North Korea, there's no lights on at night. That's just how it is. So these are just some of the things that I would suggest that you might mention, and they're concrete, difficult things that we got done. I can't tell you how hard we worked on that tax bill, not the perfect tax bill. In my situation, I have the privilege of being the chairman of the Senate Agriculture Committee. I know that if nobody else does, and I will as well if there are a lot of people, and thank goodness there are, I have to be a champion for farmers, ranchers, growers, everybody up and down Main Street, local lending institutions, everybody connected to agriculture, and in Wichita, Kansas, America, everybody is connected to agriculture. We are going through a very difficult time, the lowest prices in 5 years, some way below the cost of production. As an example of what we are up against, if I can use that term, or what our challenge is, that's a better term, the Kansas sorghum producers were in my office at precisely the same time. I was at the White House urging the president to be mindful that what he does in terms of tariffs, there's retaliation. And here came the Chinese with 179% tariff on sorghum. We at least got the president to understand how to pronounce sorghum. He was saying sorghum, and so we got that taken care of. But that's the big worry that we have. And if you look yesterday at what we are allegedly doing with $50 billion with a tariff on the EU, on Canada, and on Mexico, and on China. All of them have said we will retaliate, and guess who they're going to retaliate on? That's us. The airline industry, small manufacturing, large manufacturing, certainly agriculture. And I just think it is terribly unfortunate, and we have to get the president to understand you cannot use farmers, ranchers, growers, everybody connected with agriculture, and I'm just going to segment that out, there's a lot of others, as pawns in this business of reaching a deal that he thinks would be helpful with our trade deficit. Now, having said that, I give the president credit for trying to take a look at China, because China has a long view, a long game to play in terms of economics. And I get that. I get we need reform of their intellectual property behavior, copyright law. Anybody that goes to China and sets up a plant knows that in 2 or 3 years the Chinese have stolen all of their secrets with regards to how they operate. So you ought to know that before you go over there, and just sort of guard against it or understand that that's the way it's going to be. But we cannot ignore 1.4 billion people. some of which do not have a diet that they would really want, more especially with more protein. And there again, we were exporting sorghum, which is a feed grain, which goes to the poultry industry over in China, and the Chinese like chicken. So it was a wonderful market. They have ended the 179% tariff only, I think, to put it back after the news that the president is coming with a 50%, or pardon me, 50 billion in tariffs. I certainly hope this works better than a lot of people, and a lot of people that have been involved in trade for a long time, including myself. I certainly hope it goes better. I have my doubts. Greg Dowd is the lead negotiator on agriculture. He is from Mankato, Kansas. He worked for me, and then he was the head guy at the National Cattlemen. He's a great pick. He's a stubborn guy, and he works hard. Bob Lighthizer, who is our trade rep, worked 15 years for Bob Dole. At his confirmation process, even before it was my turn, he said, well, I want to emphasize one thing for Senator Roberts' information. I know that you can't eat steel. And so it started off pretty good, but I don't know. I don't know if this president is wrapped around the axle with barbed wire. There's another allegory that my staff says nobody understands. Just think of it this way. If you drove a pickup and you drove over a whole bunch of barbed wire and it all rolled up on your rear axle and you couldn't get anywhere, you're going to have to get the pickup up in a service station. Then you're going to have to go up there and get the barbed wire out. Well, he's wrapped around that in that way, being more of a populist and a I don't want to say that he's a complete person who believes in tariffs and a protectionist. We have so much invested, especially in agriculture, and setting up these arrangements. I think the best thing that we could do is give TPP another look. He actually said he was going to do that about 2 or 3 weeks ago and then walked it back after Roberts immediately raced to the microphone and said the president is taking another look at TPP. And I was walking back with Deb Fisher from Nebraska. She says, Pat, on a scale of 1 to 10, what chances do we have on him actually re-engaging with TPP? I said, probably 0, but it's a nice thing to say. Now, that's a hell of a note, but I think that at least would be something that we could work on. Not to mention NAFTA. We have to modernize NAFTA, but the way it's going now, and what Mr. Trudeau said publicly, and what the new president in July, if he's elected, he's a real populist. He wants Mexico to become self-sufficient. And that's what we're doing is affecting an election in a country where they usually bought our Kansas wheat on the Kansas City Southern Railway. So it's a difficult time. I am in the midst of trying to write, along with many others, the Farm Bill. I can report to you that I think we'll have the bill ready June 6th. We'll have it wound up, ready to go to the floor the next week. And as soon as we get it out of committee, and this isn't our first rodeo, I've worked with Senator Stabenow on this. The Ag Committee is probably one of the least partisan committees that we have in the Congress. We will get it to the floor. We already have clearance from Schumer, we hope, and then obviously Mitch McConnell. So hopefully mid-month we'll get our bill done. The House is still trying to get their bill passed. I have to get 60 votes. That means I must be bipartisan. That's a goal anyway that I have. That's the way we've always operated. And then it will go to conference. We work out the differences. And then we give farmers predictability and certainty, and that is the number one issue facing us in writing a farm bill. Each section of the country would like to have more. Each section of the country said, oh my goodness, look at what's happened to us the last 5 years. And Mother Nature hasn't really treated us very well, and boy is that the case in Kansas with this last hailstorm. So I know everybody wants more. I know the people in charge of the SNAP program want more. That's not the issue. The issue is to get a bill so farmers have certainty and predictability so they can go ahead on that next crop year and tell their banker or tell their lender, hey, we're okay, we can keep going. So with that, thank you very much for the opportunity to visit with you, and I'll be happy to respond to any questions that you might have. Remember, this is another crossroads year. If the House switches, if for some reason, and I don't think we will, but if the Senate flips, every one of these things is going to try to be overturned, and the president will have to veto them. And we are now in a position where we can do things. I do not want to be in a position to yield the gavel to my compatriot from Michigan so that they can undo an awful lot of these things that we have done in behalf of the American people. Thank you again, and let's have any questions.
Senator Roberts, if anyone has any questions, they'll raise their hand. I'll bring the mic so we can all hear their question.
Sure.
Senator, the recent Iraq election, the Muslim player Sadar, whatever, he presumably got elected. This guy was a thorn in the side of the American soldiers over there. What's your take on that?
Well, it's not good. There was some concern with regard, you get involved in various countries, and I'm trying to remember the National Security Advisor to Reagan, and I'll think of his name in a minute. We went through all those discussions about going into Iraq to begin with. I was chairman of the Intelligence Committee at that particular time, only to find out that Saddam did not have WMD, and that was a worldwide intelligence failure, not only on us, but everybody else. And he said, if you win, what do we win? If you push Humpty Dumpty off the wall, Americans just don't leave. We put the pieces back together and say, okay, you got a shot, that's why we're here. And oh, by the way, we would like to take care of the people that pay the ultimate sacrifice, please, and bring them home. That's the only thing we've ever asked of anybody in terms of any involvement. So we leave Iraq. All of a sudden we have a situation with Iran, and that I don't know how to describe that deal with Iran, but it just was not a good agreement. The president has acted on that. Obviously we have Syria, obviously we have Russia, obviously we have China extending their influence 600-700 miles out into the Pacific Ocean. And so you concentrate on all these things, it's sort of like a whack-a-mole, and all of a sudden you pop up and you find out the election in Iraq, after all that sacrifice, all that effort, that comes back to that question that was asked by his national security advisor at the time when we first went into Iraq. Actually, that wasn't Reagan, it was under Bush, but it was the Reagan national security advisor who asked that. Scowcroft, whose advice I always admired. So here we are with an election in Iraq and a person that in the past has not exactly been our friend, to say the least. It is what it is. You would think that you can't interfere with an election like that, but I will tell you that Shia-Sunni divide isn't going to go away anytime soon. It just is not. And I could tell you other stories about that, but we don't have time for that.
Right here.
Right here.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, sir.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the state of the military? I know it's kind of degraded under the last administration. Can you talk a little bit about maybe what the goal of the new administration is and where it is today?
I'm sorry, what was the last part?
Where it was under the last administration and the goal for the new administration.
We are trying to restore and rebuild everything that every person in the service uses in behalf of our national security. We were seeing planes that couldn't fly, and that we had about a third of whatever aircraft I'm talking about on the tarmac, trying to get fixed. A lack of ammunition, for instance, in certain hotspot areas. Some of the things that the terrorists had that we don't have, that we're not up to speed. God knows, I don't know why it took us 2 or 3 years to get armament on the bottom of anything that moved, whether it's a tank or a truck or this, that, or the other, from all these roadside bombs. And it turned out there was a real bottleneck there somewhere, and why we couldn't have gotten that taken care of, we would have saved innumerable lives and people coming home in ways that nobody would prefer to go through that. And we're living with that right now. I would just say that in terms of readiness and the time of training, we just had 4 soldiers killed in Syria, and they were not in the place they were supposed to be, and then when they came under fire, they didn't do what their training indicated they should do. So when you compound the training, and when you have a Secretary of the Navy with regards to the Navy and the United States Marine Corps, and you try to achieve social justice within the military, that's a bad, bad mistake. The goal of the military is to win, and win the war, or don't use them. Victory has to be spelled out. What are we going to achieve in victory? And then the American people, I think, will support that if somebody can tell them exactly why my son or daughter is going to X, Y, or Z. I don't think that was done very well under the previous administration. I think this administration is trying to take care of that. So it's pretty much across the board with everything that we have to have. Now, we in the Marine Corps know that we're a baling wire outfit, and so we get, we're last in the, we just have to do it the way we possibly can with our Springfield rifles and Sam Brown belts and things like that.
Next question. Thank you.
This is my right flank here.
I had a question to ask about the Genome Project and how in the Farm Bill, I haven't read it recently, how in the Farm Bill, the research section for looking and improving crops and also livestock, is some of that salvaged?
We will be able to increase funds for research, not by the amount that we would like to have, but you've touched on something that's extremely important for our ability to feed this country in a very troubled and hungry world. We're very much aware of that. That's the kind of technology that if farmers are not aware of that, or at least do not have access to that kind of technology, and where we are moving in the modern day of agriculture, the chances of that farmer, rancher, grower, family are not as good as opposed to having access to that. So one, we're increasing the research for it. Secondly, we're trying to get the access worked out so that our farmers have access to it.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. We have 2 over here. 3, maybe 2. Don't give it to Tim.
Yeah, I gather you support TPP, but I don't. And it's because it sets up an international body which will control membership and the regulations. And as we know, as bureaucracies are in Washington, they can get out of control and not accomplish things that are good for the people. So what is it you see in TPP that would protect against that?
When I was on a Codell with John Cornyn, and we went to Australia, we went to Indonesia, we went on up to South Korea, went over to Japan, all members of the TPP right now. I think there are 11, they'd like to have 12. Originally, we were going to take a good look at joining that organization, as you call a bureaucracy that is making decisions for us. We already have that. It's called the World Trade Organization. And I understand that there are farmers who have told me in a very modest way, to hell with the WTO. Brazil filed a case against the cotton industry some years back. Cotton wanted to know if the WTO stove was hot, and they touched it, and it was hot. And out of the CCC funds, all of agriculture had to pay millions and millions and millions of dollars in penalties because of what the cotton industry was doing. I'm not trying to pick on cotton, I'm just giving you an example of what's happened. We are under the WTO right now. One of the efforts that the president has is to bring China into their WTO requirements. And if you're going to join the WTO, at least you should be WTO compliant like everybody else is. They're not. And that's one of the reasons he's taking a look at the long game, plus the trade deficit that he feels is more important as opposed to the trade surplus for agriculture. Now, If that already exists, and we have that bureaucracy, you call it bureaucracy, I call it the World Trade Organization, and if we can get everybody to comply, we're in a heck of a lot better situation if we just go it alone. The latest issue right now is the administration suggesting that every trade agreement would end after 5 years and then take another look. You do that, and you'll have Mexico making a permanent agreement with Argentina for their wheat and with Brazil for corn. Lighthizer told me, he says, well, look, if you're going to end it after every 5 years, think of what they would buy the 4th year, because they wouldn't know what's going to happen on the 5th year. And I said, Bob, that's loony. They're not going to sign up to begin with. Every country that we visited during that time, about 2 years ago, said, is the United States going to continue with their efforts to join TPP? And I said, why are you so interested in that? And they said, we don't want to do business with China. They're doing business with China now. But they, whoever it was that we were talking to as a group, said, we want you in TPP. We don't want to do business with China. And then in a very quiet voice, almost every one of them said, it would also mean that you have our back. So from a national security standpoint, putting all those countries together in an economic system or organization seems to me it works to our national security, our presence in the Pacific, to offset what China is trying to do. Is it perfect? No. I've been involved in a lot of trade agreements. They're always oversold, and they're always over-criticized. But there is a sweet spot there that really helps everybody in Wichita, everybody in Kansas with regards to access to markets. Right now, there is still wheat from last year's crop sitting on the ground that should be going to Mexico. And the Kansas City Southern, whose market price has gone south, that's where they should be going. But at any rate, it's not. There's no Kansas wheat going to Mexico. And I doubt with the election of the new president, it may never go to Mexico. Where in the hell do we sell it? TPP would be a great opportunity. They want our wheat. They want our rice. They want our soybeans. They want our sorghum. They want all the fruits and nuts, including Jerry Brown, to boot in California. And so I just think to just say we're going to go it, we're going to go it alone. It just doesn't make any sense. There's going to be a lot of retribution with regards to this if we're ending into a trade war. Now, he plays those cards, okay? Maybe they work. Who knows? Maybe Peter Navarro is a genius, the guy that came up the ladder who is now advising the president. Peter Navarro came to the Senate of the United States, came to the Finance Committee, talked to Republicans first and then a bipartisan group. He had a list of 31 policy objectives. They were in 12-point. You couldn't even read them. He could. And so he read them to us and explained each one. And about halfway through, at the risky business of offending our chairman, who's a nice guy, Orrin Hatch, I said, would you mind if I ask a question? Yeah, sure, go ask a question. I said, well, you're at 15 now, Mr. Navarro. We have copy machines. And you could have provided us a copy with that 31 objective situation. And, most senators can read. All staff can read. And we could have gone over that and maybe done it a little faster rather than you just reading it to us and saying this is what we want to do. 3 or 4 of those things we already got rid of. We didn't want them. And so the next day did the same thing. I came in a little bit late. I slapped him on his back. I said, hey, Pete, did you get that copy machine thing going? Now, some people act that way in the Senate when they get upset, and I'm sorry to say that I let that cat out of the bag with regards to my behavior, but honest to God, 31 policy objectives, some of which we don't want in every trade bill, but he is where he is. He was in the executive office building. Now he's right in the White House. We thought we had him in the basement and with the door locked, but that didn't happen.
Next question here.
Thank you.
You're still looking very skeptical. I'm trying to sell you, and I'm not making it. We had one more. Oh, over
Thank you
here.
very much for being
Yes, sir.
here, for visiting the Pachyderm. You certainly are fun to listen to. I have two questions on two entirely different topics, and I'll keep them real short. The first one is I'm really appreciative of mostly the president cutting out between $50 and $60 million to Planned Parenthood from Title X. But that is only one of the revenue streams of federal tax money that's going to Planned Parenthood. And my question to you is, when can we get the other, I don't even know what they all are, but when can we get some of these other revenue streams to Planned Parenthood cut? Now, my second question, completely different topic. Kansas feedlots typically, when they're finishing an animal, they're dumping antibiotics in the meat, or in the food that the cattle eat, whether they're sick or not. They just dump antibiotics in there. The antibiotics is ending up in the meat, and now there's early research showing that antibiotics in the meat is killing some of the good bacteria in the human stomachs, causing America to be overweight, probably more than any other factor. Would you support some research on this to see if that's all true? And if so, if we could stop them from giving antibiotics to an animal that's not sick?
China would appreciate that. They use that as a trade barrier. Sound science will tell you that some of virtually all of your concerns with regards to what is in American meat are simply not the case. They do not represent any danger to humans. I'm putting on my cowboy hat now and the National Cattleman. We're not dumping anything into an animal that it would be a minute amount of whatever hormone kind of growth situation would make. China is now accepting our meat. Japan has been a problem in that way, but the Kobe meat that they produce, they use even more. I would urge you, and I'm going to sick one of my staff people on you, and then we'll send you some stuff to make sure that you know that APHIS and several other agencies within the Department of Agriculture monitor that very closely. And we sure as heck do not want that to be a worry, and a common worry with regards to the beef industry, not only in Kansas but all across the country. On the pro-life situation and Planned Parenthood, you are right that direct funding is not or is prohibited. There are other ways to get around that, and we are trying to close those loopholes. Thank you.
Pat Roberts, let's give him a big hand for being here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.